As of 1959, I became very interested in the subject of secret societies and subversive movements. I came about it because of my family. When I was very small, my mother's uncle worked in the Vatican Secretary of State's office as a civilian. And on occasions when he would come back to home to visit, back to this country, he would sit and talk for hours about the intrigue going on throughout the world, behind the scenes of religion and politics, and all the nefarious plans that are being fomented by governments and religion. And I became fascinated with this subject. Since then, I have, as I said, since 1959, I have really delved into the subject myself, and I find the more that you find out about this subject, the more you know how much you don't know, because it is an enormous subject that takes in not only the fraternal orders, the secret societies of Freemasonry, the occult societies going back into the most ancient world, going back to pre-Sumerian, and those symbols and emblems which were used in the ancient world are now even being used in our world, our modern day world, and we don't even realize it. As a matter of fact, things like the oil companies, the automotive companies, the cigarette companies use symbols and emblems, and of course in government, national institutions, educational institutions. Our world is filled with symbols. And symbols are like the letters of the alphabet. If you put enough of them together, they spell a word. And you put a lot of them together, and they tell you a story. The story I am talking about is the secret societies and occult orders that go all the way back into the ancient world, and I believe, and it's my opinion, that they are still in operation today behind our major religions and major governmental agencies. The symbols and emblems you can see with your own eyes, and do some research, and you'll find that they go back into the ancient world. Now, we like to talk about that there's a separation of church and state in America. The fact of the matter is no such separation exists. There is a very direct connection between the religious establishment in this country and the political establishment. And as you probably well know, has always been the case. All the way back to the pre-Sumerians, the king was always the mediator between God and man, as well as being head of the temporal state. The pharaohs, of course, of Egypt perfected this so that they were both gods and mortals who were ruling the state. The Caesars picked up on this, of course, and it's come down through the ages. And even in our country of America today, we have a direct connection between church and state. And let me draw your attention to this, make you an example here. Churches, when you go into most churches, you will find that there are like 3 tiers high, and then the altar sits on the top tier. The same is true in a courtroom. You go into a courtroom and you'll see that the bench sits on 3 tiers high, and the 3 tiers high has been traced in the reference works of Freemasonry to the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry.
That's correct.
Yes, and so then you have the priest who comes out, the clergy who comes out with the long robe, and incidentally the reason why clergy always wear long robes is because it's a female garment, and it represents the feminine connection with God, and that's why clergy wear a long robe. It also has to do with when the clergy wears the long robe, the judge, when the judge comes out, he wears the same long black robe. It's the same black robe that you wear when you graduate from university or high school. The black robe is a very important symbol. It has to do with a very ancient cult called the Saturnalian cult, going back into the ancient Semitic world, the worship of Saturn. Black was a color attributed to Saturn, and even today in Islam, in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, you have this square of Mecca within the magic circle, or within the Masonic circle, and Mecca is black, and it's draped in a black robe. And so this is a world fraternity of secret societies that use the same symbols. But let me get back to the government, the courtroom, and the church. When you're sitting at a church, you of course are looking up onto the altar, and the priest is looking down on you. There is always a fence in the church, and then there's a gate, and only the priest can go through the gate to enter the altar. The same thing is true in a court. There is the fence and there's the gate, and only the attorneys can go through, and they're called the logos, and they go through and talk to the judge for you. And of course, the judge is sitting 3 tiers high, so he can look down on you, and you look up to him. The same symbols which are used in religion are used in political circles. And I am saying, it's my opinion, that what we have in America is a religio-political economic scheme based on a very ancient secret societies and fraternal orders. And until such time as we understand that concept, that things just don't happen. I mean, what was it? Franklin Roosevelt even said, anything that happens in politics, it was planned that way. And until such time as you understand that things are planned in politics and that there is a rhyme and a reason to things, we're never going to get to the bottom of this. A classic example of what I'm talking about is we here in this country, we hear politicians, the president and the local leaders saying that they can't seem to get a handle on the crime problem, the drug problem, all of the different problems that are facing us as a people, and they just can't seem to get a handle on these things. However, if you put a wrong comma on your income tax, they can get a hold on you. And if you go into the Amazon jungles, they'll follow you, and they will find you. And it may take a while, but they'll spend millions, and they will find you. And they will bring you back here, and they will deal with you in public to show the rest of the people that you can mess around with other people, but you don't mess with the money and the government, okay? So the point I'm making is that if they cannot seem to get a hold on crime, but they can get a hold on you, the question should be asked, how is it that a country 50 years ago, which was a lot less sophisticated, got a hold on Adolf Hitler, and he had a standing army all over the world? They can get a hold on the Soviet national economy and destroy peoples and nations all around the world. They can get a hold on anybody they want, except for the drug trade, except for the crime. And I'm saying that the crime and the drug trade in this country are purposely allowed to exist, and in certain cases even promoted. Because according to the ancient cults of the ancient world, there was a term that has come down to us, and many Freemasons in the audience will readily remember this. According to the ancient cults, there was something called Ordo ab Chaos in Latin, which meant order out of chaos. Right. So the idea was that if you can create enough chaos, that the people will be sufficiently frightened and will give to you the power and the political power to bring back law and order. Now, there was a television comedy program many years ago called Get Smart. Now, when people tell you to get smart, it's implying that you're missing something here. All right, Get Smart. You'll remember that on one side in the TV show Get Smart, on one side was chaos and the other side was control. And I'm saying that's exactly how you get control, by causing chaos. The idea is that if you're going to pull a scam on somebody, you're going to pick somebody's pocket or something, you always have a diversion. You do something to draw the person's attention while you're picking his pocket. If you're going to break out of a prison, you always have the gang fight down at the far end while the guys are crawling out the hole on the other end. The idea is you set up a diversion, you cause chaos, and out of that you can get control, because people will sufficiently frighten people will give you the power to put down these problems. Now, Adolf Hitler did this, and he worked it perfectly, and it works. A lot of people are wondering, why is it that the German people would have ever allowed Hitler to do what he did? Hitler was elected to office because of the chaos that he was doing. He was causing the chaos. The people came sufficiently frightened, and so they had given him the political power to put down the trouble, because they knew he was the only guy that could put down the problems, because he was the one that was causing it. So I'm saying that the same kind of scam is being worked in this country today. We're seeing nothing but chaos and nothing but trouble, and I'm saying that it's all orchestrated, that you couldn't possibly imagine people like the President of the United States making mistakes. I mean, you hear every day, what Senator so-and-so made a terrible mistake, or the United States government made a terrible mistake in Vietnam, or they made a horrible mistake on this or that. This country don't make mistakes. If they do something, they have a reason for doing it. They don't pay these people, these doctors and professional psychologists and his whole army of brains at the Vatican. I mean, well, that's a Freudian slip, probably in the Vatican too. But at the what is it? The Pentagon.
Pentagon.
Yeah, they don't pay these people big money to make mistakes. The president, when he does something, or this government does something, they know what they're doing. Now, it may not make any sense to you, but according to other plans, if you understand what's going on behind the scenes, it makes a lot of sense. And
let me interject something in here for you, Jordan, so that you'll understand. My listening audience has had 22 hours already. Their education is far beyond anybody that you normally talk to.
Right.
They understand what we're talking about. They understand the involvement of the Vatican. They understand the symbology of the mystery schools.
Right.
Now, we may have some listening audience out there who just tuned into this show or maybe just found it a couple of shows ago, but most of my listening audience worldwide have been listening to this show since the 4th of May, 1992, and have an extensive education into all of this. So if you want to cut to the meat of the matter, these people will understand. You don't have to build up to it.
Right. Well, I mean, I talk to audiences so often, and I'm aware that when I'm talking to an audience, that people generally have not been initiated into this kind of thinking, and so that's why I try and lay a foundation for. There are a lot of occult symbols and emblems in government and religion, and I wanted to get into one in particular. The Nazis, the communists, the fascists, and all of the ancient world powers that have ever existed have used one common symbol continually, and that's the sun. Now, if you understand that the earliest history, the prehistory of the human race goes back into the most ancient times, and God knows how far back that would be, 10, 20,000, maybe 50,000 years, I don't know. But if you go back to the earliest times of the human race, you can appreciate that the world was a very different place than what we live in today, okay? And so if you understand that it was a very cold and very fearful world at night, okay? And if you understand also that in that cold and fearful world, when the sun went down, there was a lot of fear for your life. There were a lot of predatory animals. And so the coming of the sun the next morning was always something to look forward to, that brought warmth, that brought light, and brought security. And around that concept grew a whole religio-political philosophy of the coming of the sun, God's sun, the light of the world. And it has been used by the ancient Egyptians, all the mystery schools, and of course you probably know it was referred to as Baal worship at one time. Baal was the sun, God's sun, the light of the world. And, you know, the whole concept in the ancient world was that he had 12 helpers, which were the 12 signs of the zodiac, or the 12 months of the year. And of course, and he died, of course, with a crown of thorns, like the Statue of Liberty has the crown of thorns. It's the corona, or the sun rays. And when we begin to see all of these connections, and of course, in the spring of the year, the sun, which had died in winter, had passed over from the death of winter into the new life of spring. So in the old Semitic world, they celebrated the Passover. And we even say that today when someone dies, they passed on, or they passed away, or they passed over.
Right.
And so we get the old symbolism out of Egypt of the sun dying in the winter and passing over to the new life in spring. And so in the beginning of spring, we had the Passover. Is an interesting thing, too, about the sun is that the ancient world realized that on the December 22nd, which was the winter solstice, they noticed something interesting on the sundials. And of course, the sundials being round, they could each degree for each day. They noticed that on the 22nd, the sun did not move. On the 22nd, it stayed on the sundial on the same degree. On the 23rd, it stayed on the same degree. It didn't move any further south, and it didn't start back north. On the 24th, it was still in the same degree on the sundial. It didn't move. So they said, the ancient Egyptians said, anything that was moving and is now not moving is dead. So therefore they said God's son died and was in his tomb or dead for 3 days. Then on December 25th, anything that was dead and in his grave and not moving for 3 days and now begins to move back to the northern hemisphere, it moved its first degree. So on December 25th, they said God's Son is born on December 25th.
Now, in the real world, let's clarify something for a lot of people who are listening out there. You're not talking anything about Christmas. You're not talking about what Christians traditionally recognize as,
I'm getting
as
into
the birth of Christ. You're getting into the symbolism
right.
of the ancient religion of the sun,
right.
which was later perverted in Christianity to reflect this in order to capture the pagan worshipers into the Christian church.
Absolutely, right. Now, what I'm saying is that
because December the 25th is not Christ's birthday.
No, not at all. No, it's the birthday of the sun.
Right.
And then, but then when you understand that this symbolism began to be, the ancient peoples understood that the sun was revolved, and it was a symbol of revolution. And today in America we have, or at least in the western part of the United States, we have an oil company called Union Oil. Union Oil has as a symbol a round orange globe with the 76, and of course the commercial says, get the spirit of 76. The orange globe is the sun, because the communists have always used the rising sun. You know, if you recall, on the Soviet National Coat of Arms,
certainly,
is the rising sun that's bringing the dawn of a new day.
And the symbology of 76 plugs into what's called
the 76, and the 13, 76 is 13.
Right, and the order of the trapezoid. And if you figure out the formula of the ancient religion, which says, as above, so below, the creation of this country in 1776 was guaranteed to bring into the world the new man, the illumined man, 3 degrees of 6x, or 666.
Right. And 8 is the number in the old Kabbalistic Freemasonry in Europe. 8 was the number of new beginnings. And the new beginnings, was 17, is 7 and 1, 8. And 13 was, of course, the old mystic number of God and his 12 helpers, of God in his 12 months make 13.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
it's also the number of death and rebirth, or resurrection, or
right.
reincarnation, depending upon how you look at that. But
so once you get into all of the symbolism, you see that there is a rhyme and a reason to all of these emblems and symbols. And something else in relation to word symbols, and God knows we're inundated by innuendos and catchphrases in this country especially. We've been hearing since George Bush made it publicly known, something called the New World Order. I want to clarify something for your audience. They probably might already know this, but Europe has been referred to as the Old World, and anything coming out of Europe is Old World, all right? The Vatican has dominated Europe for about 1,500, 1,600 years. The Vatican has dominated Europe. Europe has dominated the world. There was a religio-political economic scheme of things. That was the order of the day. The old banking houses of the Roman Empire, the old, what was some of the families? Arius, Copernicus, Pisos. The Pisos family were a very powerful banking family who were the main brains behind. They were the Rockefellers of the Roman Empire.
The Medicis.
The Medicis, absolutely. And so when you understand that there was a banking, fraternal, religio-political order that operated throughout the world, and the Vatican sat on top of that, and that was an old world order. Now, with the coming of America, of course, America is referred to as the New World, and so what we have now is a New World Order. And that New World Order implies that there is a fraternal order operating throughout the world, operating out of America, that seeks to, it seeks to take the place of the old world order and bring a new order of the world. But you must understand that you cannot have a new order or a new building on the same site as an old building. So you've got to get rid of the old order first and bring in the new order. When you get into that, and I'm sorry, I'm got a frog in my throat.
That's okay.
When you get into that, you get into the symbolism Steven Spielberg and George Lucas bring out about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And of course, you can't understand the Last Crusade if you don't understand the First Crusade, right?
Or the next crusade.
Or the next crusade, which is the real crusade, right? And then from there, you get the trilogy of Star Wars, and then the Empire Strikes Back. And of course, New York is referred to as the Empire State.
That's correct.
All right, and so you get the Empire Strikes Back, and then of course, you might know this, that in Freemasonry, there is a little ideologue or a little genie-like mystical character, supposedly in Freemasonry, that they said was their mediator between the gods and the Freemasons of the Knights Templars. And that little saint, or that little, what would I say, mediator, in the old Knights Templar tradition was a little short, little monster with pointed ears, and his name was Yoda. And you go into the old Masonic literature and pictures, and you'll see pictures of Yoda, because he was a Jedi Knight. And if you understand the Jedi Knights, where it was connected to the old order of the knightshood of the Knights Templars. So what we're talking about here is the Star Wars. We're talking about a spiritual war in the heavens, so to speak.
Well, this was a cosmology, a celestial religion, so to speak.
Absolutely.
They talk about moving on to the celestial sphere,
right?
When they discuss passing on.
That right, and then of course the sun was. Well, the ancient Egyptians said that the sun walked across the sky, so therefore we have Luke Skywalker.
And then from this comes 1,000 points of light.
That's 1,000 points of light, and a 1,000-year reign of the Nazi Empire, or whatever. And what we're talking about here is secret societies and their use of symbols and emblems in religion and politics and philosophy. And incidentally, when you graduate from university, I meant to bring this out. When you graduate from university, you wear a long black robe. The black robe is, of course, the same black robe that the priest wears. It's the same black robe that the judge wears, all right? Because the black robe symbolized it goes back to the old Saturnalian cult, which was pre-Egyptian, the worship of Saturn. And according to that ancient Semitic cult, when you got married, you wear the ring. The ring was the ring of Saturn. The women would show their submission to that god by wearing the ear ring. That's where we get the idea of the king being crowned. He wears a round crown, or the round circle of the god of Saturn. Saturn, as I said, was the sign, the color black. And therefore, the black robe is the worship of Saturn, the Saturnalian god. What was I going to say about? Oh yes, and when you graduate with a square mortarboard. The square mortarboard is always the symbol of the brick masons use the mortarboard. And then, of course, when you graduate, you are referred to as an alumni, which comes from the word illumini. You have been illuminated, which basically means you now know what to kiss and when, and how to think and what to think, and how to act, and you have been properly educated.
You belong to the priesthood.
That's right. You belong to the priesthood, and if you go along to get along, and don't cause any problems, then you
go along to get along. You might get a little, right?
That's right, exactly.
Nobody else gets anything.
And my point is, and I have said this to so many audiences, that there is this country, the United States, has no real enemies in the world. After the Second World War, especially, is that true?
Well, every enemy, even before the Second World War, the enemies that we've had have been creation.
That's right. We created them. Absolutely. But there is one legitimate, believable enemy that faces America, that the powers behind the throne in this country, in America, are truly afraid of, and this is legitimate. They are totally frightened to death of us, the people, because they realize if the people ever wake up, I mean, something that Joe Kennedy was quoted as saying, something to the effect of beware the American conscience, because if they ever wake up and find out what we're doing, it's going to be hell to play. And so I believe that there is a legitimate enemy that this country perceives, and that's us. People who think too much, people who read too much, and people who talk too much.
But that's always the case, though, Jordan, because we know that what's coming is going to be a socialist state.
Oh, totally.
Every time socialism has won anywhere, the first thing that they've done is that they have literally perverted the intelligentsia which has brought them to power. And then the first thing that they did is kill the intelligentsia. They killed them.
Absolutely.
And the intelligentsia aren't very intelligent because they haven't learned this yet, because they're still doing it. But
the more we change, the more we stay the same.
That's right. We'll come back to that in just a few minutes. Folks, I hope you're paying attention to this show, because Jordan has an awful lot to say, and you can hear that he's right in tune with what we've covered before.